As a Catholic, I was raised to believe that Jesus was born of a Virgin Mary who was conceived through God. That belief was presented as foundational, totally unquestionable. It wasn't until I was in my mid-40s that I really began to examine this doctrine quite closely. And once I did, many ideas I had absorbed about Christianity began to unravel. Basically, as I started to develop an understanding of the historical context of the church, this became a powerful antidote to recognising coercion and high control groups that try to control interpretations of biblical narratives. As I explained in my last video, until about 150 years ago, human understanding of procreation was radically different to what we know today. Ancient theories of reproduction weren't based on genetics or ovulation, but philosophy and quite crude observations, like Aristotle's model, which dominated for centuries. In his view, the male seed contained the full human essence, while the woman simply provided the space and the material substance for the fetus's development. That idea shows up really clearly in Christian art, particularly in Annunciation paintings, where Mary is often depicted as being impregnated by a ray of light carrying a dove. That image isn't random, it reflects Aristotle's biology. But not all Annunciation paintings included that particular symbolism, and that tells us something. One explanation is that not everyone accepted Aristotle's model. Another influential figure was Galen, who believed both men and women contributed seed in a different kind of understanding of contraception. So even within Christian art, we can see competing fertility theories quietly coexisting. What later theology presents as a single belief was in reality shaped by multiple, often contradictory scientific assumptions. And importantly, not all early Christians even believed in the virgin birth at all. Some groups believed Jesus became God's son at his baptism, not his conception. In these traditions, divine sonship was something conferred, not biologically inherited. This wasn't fringe thinking at the time. It reflects how fluid early Christianity really was. Then there were the Gnostics, who took an even more radical view. Some didn't believe Jesus was physically real at all. For them, Christ was a spiritual or symbolic presence, not a biological one. Which means debates about Mary's womb were, for some early Christians, beside the point. There's also the Jewish context, which is often overlooked. In the Hebrew Bible, the word later translated as virgin typically means young woman of a marriageable age, not sexual virginity in the modern sense, although the two can sort of mean the same thing. When Hebrew texts were translated into Greek, that word took a much stronger biological meaning, and once that meaning entered theology, it stuck, even though it wasn't originally there. It's also worth knowing that describing great men as being born of virgins wasn't unique to Jesus. Figures like Plato and Alexander the Great were also given similar origin stories. The degree to which these narratives of virgin births were meant as medical claims can be debated, as they were also a symbolic way of saying, hey, this person is an extraordinary human, so much so he must be the son of gods. There is also a connection here between the Greeks equating male gods with nous, that is intelligence, but that's something I'll cover in a bit more detail at another time. So when we step back, what we see isn't one ancient belief that everyone agreed on when it comes to defining what the Virgin Mary means or represents. Instead, we kind of see layers. Ancient biology, translation shifts, competing Christian theologies, symbolic storytelling, and later, institutional power deciding which story would survive above all of the others. And at times this was done through overt domination, such as the excommunication of anyone who disagreed with the set theology. And all this leaves me with some questions that I still sit with. Like, how and when did the science of procreation begin to unsettle the Holy Roman Church's certainty? What happened as human understanding slowly caught up with biology? This unravelling didn't begin suddenly. It was already underway before 1677, when sperm was first discovered under the microscope. And it accelerated in the late 19th century as embryology and reproductive science became clearer. Was there a quiet discussion behind closed doors? An unspoken recognition that a doctrine preached with certainty was no longer biologically tenable? Or was it a slow shift across many popes' reigns, where emphasis gently moved away from literal claims towards symbolism, until Mary was reframed primarily as the linguistic and theological mother of the Church, as though the question of contraception had never really posed a problem at all. That ambiguity between the literal and the symbolic is captured for me most beautifully in Dante's poetry. Virgin Mother, daughter of your Son, humbler and loftier past creation's measure, the forecome of the everlasting plan. You are she who ennobled human nature so highly that its maker did not scorn to make himself the creature of his creature. In your womb was the flame of love reborn. In the eternal peace of those warm ray, his flower has sprung and is so richly grown. Dante isn't necessarily giving us a biology lesson here, and he isn't giving us doctrine. He's giving us poetry, a way of holding the paradox without forcing it into science. So perhaps that's where this leaves us. The story of the Virgin Mary isn't a single claim to be defended or dismissed. It's a convergence of ancient science, translation choices, theological debate, mythic language, and institutional authority layered over centuries. And if there's anything to take away, it's this. Christian history has always been full of diverse interpretations, perspectives, and beliefs, far more than some later doctrines allow. That narrowing of belief is something we see most clearly in cults and high control groups, where complexity is treated as a threat instead of a strength. And when any dominant group attempts to control the narrative and enforce belief, history has a way of resurfacing what was suppressed. Meaning returns through questioning and being content with complexity instead of certainty. Visual literacy and the arts are powerful vehicles for that recovery. So join me next time as we have a look at some of the earliest representations of Jesus, those that are hidden in some ancient catacombs.